very much, but if we get two that can sort of talk through this, who can speak loudly? And you lowered your hand real quick. No, what you need to do is just sort of speak out so everybody can hear you, and then once y'all get done with this, then we're going to talk about it a little bit. So, who feels comfortable? Got your hands raised? All right, he's about to come out of his seat. I'm gonna get you back here in the back. You want to come up? You sure? You're looking at me like you're not sure. So anyway, I'm going to hand you these scripts, and y'all can pick out which one. One of them is.
This is cool.
You get them to pick. Okay. So you see all these packets in your seats. That is a packet that has a letter in there that one of these fellows wrote during the war. So we actually have Alex and Will. They are actually two real people that they're going to portray today. And then also Colonel Mallet from the conscription camp. They have been drafted into the Army for North Carolina to fight in the Civil War. So we're going to talk about this letter a little bit. And then also, if you look in there a little bit, you'll see some money in there. You see the money? You look good. We're going to talk about what he's got on too.
All right. You're going to be Alex. So wherever it says Alex in the blue, you talk, and your wheel, where it's red, you talk. After I talk.
Okay.
All right, so just grab a chair here. We got special seats for both of you here. Y'all are looking good. So let's talk about what they're wearing. Actually, what they're wearing is what soldiers from North Carolina would have worn. They like this kind of a hat. You see here, I have the fancy hat. You know, it's called a kepi. It was more of an ornamental hat, but a lot of the officers would wear them. A lot of the soldiers would wear them. But the really smart soldiers wore a hat called a slouch hat. Slouch hat. Why do you think they call it a slouch hat? Because it just sort of slouches, doesn't it? So, what would be the advantage of that hat over this one? What if it's raining? Who's going to get the most wet? Why? I don't have anything over my ears, do I? So he's protected on both sides and on the front and back. Also, if it was a really hot day, my ears are going to get burned. Guess what? His ears are protected. And same over here. This is a slouch hat too. So the common soldiers preferred the slouch hat over this because it was more practical, right? And so they all wore what they call jeans cloth. Jeans cloth wasn't wool and it wasn't cotton. It was a combination of both. So you can see I've got on jeans cloth. They've got on jeans cloth. The colonel here has on jeans cloth.
Here's
And they
one
had,
of them water bottles that they use before.
yeah,
Canteen.
that's a canteen. And that was an important thing to carry around because when you were marching, you wouldn't go very far if you didn't have much water, right? So you had to have the water. So anyway, we're going to have Alex and Will and Colonel Mallet. They're going to do a little skit for us and just sort of listen out for a few things, and we're going to talk about what they tell us. Okay? All right, we'll get started.
Good morning, soldiers. I'm Colonel Mallet. I'm in charge of Camp Holmes here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You have been conscripted. Today we're going to fill out your enlistment papers and you will get a $50 bounty for joining up. Lieutenant Cheek here is going to drill you and you will be assigned to a North Carolina regiment. I'll be back in a few minutes to get your enlistment papers.
Alex, what are you doing here? I thought you were working for Miss said to make shoes for the army.
Wow, well, I did not expect to see you here either. I guess I have made enough shoes for now. It looks like I'm going to the army. So you got conscripted too?
I sure did. A lot of us are in the army now. It looks like we will have to fight soon.
I am not so sure about that. I want to go home. I am worried I may never see my family again.
Don't be afraid, Alex. We have been friends for a long time. We can take care of each other. I am sure we will go home when the war is over.
Will, I am really scared. What if we don't make it through the war alive?
Oh, come on, Alex. You worry too much.
Well, I Judge Person is letting conscripts out of the army. I sent a letter to him. I think I can get out because I am a shoemaker. I hope he hears my case. I sure want to go back home.
Do you think being a shoemaker is good enough to get you out of the army?
I sure hope so. I think that shoes will always be needed for the army.
Maybe so, but I plan to stay and fight for my state. I guess you don't intend to the bounty then.
No, I do not. I heard that Judge Person won't let you out if you take the bounty. I sure hope I hear from him soon.
Well, if you do go home, please tell my folks to pray for me.
Very good. We have your enlistment papers ready, soldiers. How about a hand for your two compatriots here?
Y'all did a great job. There's some words in there that a little bit, not your regular everyday language, is it? But I appreciate y'all doing that. I think that'll help us a little bit, and we're going to talk about y'all now a little bit. Y'all okay if we talk about you?
Yeah.
All right. So we got Alex, we got Will. I got that backwards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're Alex. Will.
Yeah.
So Alex, what was Alex concerned about?
Died.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would be too. Yeah. And about missing her family or missing his family? Yeah. What about Will? What was he saying? Yeah, he was ready to fight, wasn't he? So they're both going different directions here, and so they're both sitting here in this camp, and they've both been drafted into the army. They've both been conscripted, right? So I want to hold this up. Conscription was a law that was enacted in 1862. What happened at the beginning of the war, they had enough volunteers where people were coming in willing to fight. And then after a while, they ran out of volunteers and they needed more soldiers. So they had to implement the draft, the Conscription Act. Now, the conscription started in 1862 and it went all the way through the war. So they were always looking for new soldiers. Now, when they conscripted you, you had to report to this camp, like in our case, Camp Holmes, which was a real place near Raleigh, North Carolina. And Colonel Mallett was the commandant of that camp, and his job was to train them so they could go back into regular units to go up to Virginia to fight. And so it was a busy time. And when they appeared here in camp, here we have Alex and Will. They're sitting there in the camp and they're going like, what are we going to do? And so Will has decided he's going to stay in the camp. Alex, on the other hand, has heard that there's something called an exemption. And when they put the conscription law into effect, they created these exceptions that would allow you to leave the army. And so as a shoemaker, he had heard that shoemakers were allowed to stay home. And so he was curious about that. So he wrote a letter, and on the very front page here, you can see in cursive where Alex, the real Alex, had written a letter requesting this exemption based on his job. And Judge Pearson did receive it from him right here at this house. You think about it, right inside this house, Judge Pearson was reading the actual letter, and he wrote on the back and wrote back to Alex and said, yes, you are entitled to the exemption and you can leave the army. Now, there was a little complication because the military leaders didn't like Judge Pearson letting them out of the army, right? So a lot of times they would at least try to keep them in the army until Judge Pearson issued a writ of habeas corpus to bring them back out. So I'm going to hold this one up. Habeas corpus is a Latin term. You probably don't speak Latin these days, but it's an older language that law is based on a lot of Latin sort of slogans and things. So habeas corpus, which means you have the body. Habeas means you have, corpus means the body. So when you think about the writ of habeas corpus, what is Judge Pearson telling them? He's saying, bring me the body of Alex and I will determine his fate. And so in that case, he sends a letter back to Alex saying, you need to come before me, and I'm going to release you to the shoemaker. So if you read the rest of this letter, in fact, I typed it up so you can sort of read it because it's hard to read the cursive. But if you flip through there, you also see that there's $50 in there. $50 North Carolina money from that period of time. And these are actually copies of real money. You can't spend it today. Don't get too excited. $50 was a lot of money. Do you know how much that $50 would be worth today?
100.
A lot more than 100.
A million? A million?
Not a million, but more than 1,000.
5,000.
5,000. That's right. $5,000. That's quite a large sum of money. If you had somebody come up and say, "If you'll stay in the Army, would you take this $5,000? Would you do it?"
I say, yep. Yeah.
You might do it.
No.
So guess what? If you took that money, that almost was like signing a contract saying, "I am in the Army." And if you took that $50, then Pearson said, even if you were exempt as a shoemaker, I could not let you out because you've already taken the money. So a lot of them had taken the money and they stayed in. Some of them decided not to take the money, and you heard Alex talking about that long ago. He says, "Hey, I heard that Pearson said that if you didn't take the bounty, you weren't obligated to fight." And that's what he did. And so he was able to get the writ of habeas corpus from Judge Pearson, from this house. So he received hundreds and hundreds of exemption requests here. We have examples of them up at the North Carolina Archives. I found 80 of them just from Davidson County. So there was a bunch of them. But during the war, you know, as the war progressed, more and more people came to see Judge Pearson, and he was very consistent with his rulings. He stuck to the bounty rule, he stuck to the exemption list, and he actually performed his legal duties. And but he didn't have such a good reputation with the military leaders because of that. So they were upset at him, and sometimes the generals were complaining in the field about, everybody knew who Pearson was. Everybody had heard of him. They knew what he was doing here at home. So there were a lot of folks that were being let out of the Army that the military thought they really, really needed. They were fighting a really terrible war and needed all the soldiers they could get. So it was a very conflicted time. And so Pearson, you know, survived the war. Alex and Will, what do you suspect happened to them? What do you think happened to Will? You think he died?
Oh, yeah.
He didn't. He actually was one of the lucky ones. He lived. And but he had a rough time of it. He was captured up in Virginia. He joined, I think he was put in the 31st North Carolina Regiment, and they went up into Virginia, and in one of the battles up there, he got captured. And he stayed in the prison camp there at Point Lookout in Maryland until June of 1865. So he was in prison almost 2 years, living on pretty bad food and probably pretty bad conditions. And at the end of the war, he actually came home. He was very lucky because North Carolina sent over 125,000 men and boys into the fight. About 42,000 of them did not make it home. 42,000 out of 125,000. So let's say you three went off to the war, one of you didn't come back home, but two of you did. So if you think about that, that's a 33%. If you do that in numbers, you know, it was sort of a bad time. What do you think happened to the farms? You had maybe the wife at home with kids, and they were tending the farm, taking care of cows, getting the crops in. And if the dad did not come back home, that made it really hard on him. So you think about that. Will was one of the lucky ones. He was able to come home. And Alex, I say Will, Alex, Alex stayed in the shoemaking business throughout the war, and then was actually there in Davidson County. So they both came back home to Davidson County. And I'm guessing that they probably, since they were friends before the war, they found each other and became buddies again. So that's what I'm thinking, maybe. That's what I'm hoping happened. But we don't know for sure. But anyway, Judge Pearson, after the war, he lived until 1878. So the war ended in 1865. Pearson lived another 13 or so years. And since he was Supreme Court Justice of North Carolina, he had to go to Raleigh every January to do court system. And then he would do his law school out here in the spring, and in the fall, then he'd go back to Raleigh in the wintertime. In 1878, on his trip over there, he was in the buggy. He had a fellow driving the buggy for him. They were going across the Yadkin River, and he slumped over, and he noticed that he wasn't moving. And when they got to the hotel in Winston, they realized that Pearson had passed away on the way back to Raleigh. And so when he died, he was buried in Raleigh at the Oakwood Cemetery. And he claimed over his period of teaching that he taught over 1,000 students. And a lot of them went on to become very important people like judges, lawyers. Some of them even became Supreme Court justices of North Carolina. Some of them became governors of North Carolina. And some of them became generals during the Civil War. So he taught a lot of people that under his tutelage learned the law and went off and became bigger than life people almost. But a lot of them got together after he died, and they decided to raise a bunch of money, and they raised enough money to build this huge monolith to put on his grave. And if you go to Oakwood Cemetery in Raleigh today, he has one of the tallest monuments in the entire cemetery. And that's how much they thought of him. They loved him as a teacher. You can imagine coming out here and teaching. They had that little shack right over here, little log cabin. And he would teach in there. And then he would take them out and walk them around here down through the trails and ask them questions, assuming that they had already done their homework. They had already read their books, already read the law books. They knew the law. He would ask them all these questions and say, well, what would you do in this case? What would you do over here? What would you do if this happened? And so it was a very interactive classroom, if you could picture that. You have a teacher that does that type of thing. That'd be a different way to teach. So they remembered him for the way he taught, and he was very, very good. And his style really caught note. A lot of people noted that later. Even Supreme Court justices after him always talked about Pearson being maybe their number one, judge. So anyway, he was out here in the middle of nowhere, Yadkin County, but the Supreme Court Justice of North Carolina. So it just amazes me that he chose to live here out in the middle of nowhere. Did I tell you about what one of his students said later? Somebody donated 2 books to us that were actually law dictionaries that belonged to one of his students, and they're dated 1876. And in the front of the book, the student wrote his name. And his name was Daniel, I forget his last name, but his last name was McDaniel. He wrote his name, said Richmond Hill Law School, all written in pencil. You know how sometimes when you open the book, you got blank pages at the front and back, and that's where this was written. And down below there, he said, Richmond Hill, North Carolina. And then below that, in quotes, he said, the last place in the universe. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And that's what the student, he was out here, and he remembered how isolated they were out here, and it literally was like the last place in the universe to him. So, oh, we're doing pretty good. I'm ahead of schedule. That's pretty good. How did I do that? Usually I get talking about everything. So, anyway, had you ever heard of Judge Pearson? Did y'all know about him a little bit before you came?
Yeah. Our science teacher told us some stuff.
Okay, so I think you probably have heard a little bit, but we're hoping that, by coming out here and visiting here, you know where he lived, you know how important he was before, during, and after the Civil War. A little bit of trivia here, if you can remember this. He's the only Supreme Court Justice of North Carolina that was both appointed and elected. Now, what do I mean by that? Before the Civil War and during the Civil War, the Supreme Court Justice was appointed by the governor. The governor got to pick who that would be. And then after the war, North Carolina rewrote its constitution to rejoin the Union. And part of that rewrite said that now the Supreme Court Justice is an elected position. So they must have liked Pearson as an appointed guy because he got reelected after the war. So he must have been pretty good at it. His picture is still down there in the chambers at Raleigh at the Supreme Court. So yeah, you can go down there and visit that actually too. Oh, you would ask me that. You would ask me that. I know a lot of stuff, but that's the one thing I don't remember today. But anyway, I'm so glad that y'all came today, and you're going to have some fun as you go through the rest of these stations. This is probably the one real classroom that you'll have today. And then we're going to play some games.
We did the games.
Have you already done
Yeah,
the
we
games?
did. Those were fun.
What'd you think of that?
I thought it was neat.
Yeah. Did they talk about those games maybe years ago? That's what they played.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They did. They gave a really good explanation.
Good, good,
Yes, they did.
good. So you're going to get to do a couple other things that are going to be sort of
Good.
neat today too.
Cool.
So, any questions?
Sir.
Thank you again for being such great volunteers today. Give them a hand again. I thought they did a great job.